Welcome to this session, this faculty development session on doing group work in teams, best practices. We have two terrific presenters with us this morning, Jonathan Farina and Ramona Guthrie, and they'll both be talking about ways that they use teams and the group function, group work how they did group work in teams this past semester. Ramona, I think you were already were you using Teams for group work before this?
Well, I started using Teams once we transitioned over, but the process that I'm going to talk about predated the transition to remote learning.
Okay. So the idea here is to give us some ideas for how we can do group work in teams. A lot of us do group work. And so, all right, so I'm going to ask Jonathan to go first. So, so just to remind you, this is, we can't see those of you who are attending. We do know you're out there. We can see how many of you there are. Whoa, 24 of you. Woohoo! Very excited. You will be able to see the Q&A, which will appear over in the right side of your screen, but I have to publish your questions. So you'll type it in there. So please do post in what I think we'll do is have both presenters go so that we know we have enough, we're getting to both people. And then we can do Q&A at the end. I will, they'll be able to see your questions. I'll also be reading your questions out loud though, because sometimes people have a hard time seeing the Q&A part, the chat part. And again, if your question doesn't show up immediately, it's probably because I have to just keep going in and publishing these things. So that's just one of the joys of this live Teams function. Anyway, so we're going to get started with our first presenter, and I'm going to start with Jonathan, and I'm going to send you live, and everybody will be able to see you and hear you. There you are.
Well, hello. Don't publish any conversation from Jack Shannon and Phil Mormon, who are going to harass me.
Oh, okay. All righty then.
So good morning, everyone. I was teaching a Core 3 class with 25 students in the spring, and one of the challenges in that class had been how to get conversation going when we converted to remote teaching. And for some reason, I had noticed already in my freshman English class that people had got shyer when they were on the screen. So I decided to do group work. And what I did was split the class into 5 groups of 5. And we typically started with a 10-minute quiz all semester. That was just kind of routine. And so what I did was after the 10-minute discussion, or excuse me, after the 10-minute quiz, I allotted 20 minutes every class period to have small group discussions between each of the 5 groups. And so I created a channel, and I'll show you how to do that. I'll create a channel for each group in Teams. And I scheduled that 20-minute section of class for all 5 teams during the class period for the whole semester. And because I was a part of each channel, what I would do is I would randomly pop in to each group's conversation during that part of the class. And I kept a little chart for myself so I knew that, you know, I'd popped in early in group 1 this class, and the next one I'd pop in early to group 2 and so on, so that I got the meat of their discussion. And what really helps get them going is they need to have discussion questions. And, you know, this is good teaching practice for any class, but you either can give a quiz as I did, and the quizzes always would have options. And so I said, look, if you answer only one question for the quiz, but the groups should discuss all the questions together. Another thing you could do is just give reading questions for each day of the syllabus, so that going into the reading, they already have a couple topics in mind that they're thinking about as they read, and they could talk about them as a group, with, of course, the proviso that they could always talk about whatever else they want as well. I made them keep the video on, that's really important, and I said you could only use the chat function if you were having some sort of technical difficulty, because there was that in to try to get out of doing work, and requiring the video chat really, or the video conversation, nips that in the bud. So I found it was great. These groups became closer friends than some of them already were. Some of them actually had conversations beyond class time and would set it up to talk about their papers or to just kind of socialize outside of class time, which delighted. So let me just show you the technical way to do this. And then I will talk about what I'm going to do in the fall, because I have a different kind of class and a smaller class. So let me share my screen, Mary. Am I loud? Can you all see Mary? Okay, so if you go into a team, here is my team for Faith and Doubt, which was my Core 3 class. As you see here in the left-hand column, this is the general, is just the entire class thread. You could call it whatever you'd like. And here is discussion group 1. I deleted all the channels for the presentation so that I wasn't showing you all the conversations of my students, which seemed vaguely unethical. But to create a new channel, you just go into these little dots, the ellipses, left click, add a channel, and you could call it, for exciting sake, discussion group coronavirus, and the key, you can put a description if you want, but the key is when you go to privacy here, you want to click private and then click next. And what private enables you to do is to create a custom subgroup. So now I actually added Mary Balkin to my class so that I could show you here. She will be a student. You could add as many students as you'd like. You click done. And then we've got this new discussion group down here. And then what you do, and so you'll have a row of groups, however many you want to make, to schedule a meeting, you go into your calendar function, you create a new meeting, and down here, all the usual stuff, you know how to do that. But when you add a channel, you click on whatever class you've got, and it lists all your groups. And so you just pick on the group you want to meet and do a recurring meeting. I found, and there may be a way out of this that someone smarter with Teams knows how, I had to schedule 2 meetings for each group. So I do a Tuesday meeting for the whole semester, recurring weekly, and then a Thursday meeting, recurring weekly for the whole semester. But it worked great. So on everyone's calendar, it automatically showed up as 10 minutes into class, they had a 20-minute group thing. They clicked join, participated. After that, they clicked on the general group, and we went into our full class discussion. And I thought it worked quite well. Secondly, let me just get to the project I'm going to do in the fall, because I have a smaller class of older kids. Right now it's only enrolled to 12. It'll probably end up closer to 15. But we're going to do a kind of experiential learning project. And so I'm going to divide the class into small groups of only about 3 or 4. And they're going to work on a group project throughout the entire semester. And as part of the project, they're going to have regular meetings starting day 1 with each other to discuss the readings and to discuss what they want their project to involve. And every 2 weeks, they will meet with me as a team to reflect on how the process is going, what questions they've had about the readings themselves, what kind of project they're envisioning. And so it's a way, you can't do this with a big class unless you're really going to be a martyr for the cause of teaching. It'll just take up too much of your time. But when you only have 3 or 4 groups, I incorporate it into office hours, and they'll meet with me regularly. And it's a way to get them socializing and creating community amongst themselves and kind of getting more invested and interested in the course material. So I'll stop there, Mary, and move on to Ramona.
Okay. We actually do have a quick question here, which I think we'll do. So, Tara Wager is asking, do you have to add attendees, or is it just putting the channel in enough?
If you just put in that channel, that group will get the whole meeting. Yeah, that whole group's, all their email addresses will go on, as will yours as the creator of that group.
Okay, very good. Terrific. So
Yeah,
I will,
which, by the way, I didn't know in the spring. In the spring, I did it all manually, and even doing it the old-fashioned way, it took like an hour, and I was set for the whole semester.
right.
So
And
this way,
Kelly,
it'll take about 10 minutes.
right, Kelly is following up with a similar question. Interested in knowing if we have to create, I think this is a different question, a new channel every time if we want to switch up the groups. Also, is some aspect of that changing soon?
So let me go back. If we go into a team here,
Okay.
to change up the groups,
Whoa.
you click on this. You could always add members and delete members
Okay. Oh, there we go.
to adjust them. So fortunately, I had met with the class for 2 months at the time, so I knew who was sitting next to each other by choice and who seemed to be getting along with each other. And I also happened to know who was struggling and who might need, to be put, who would go along well together. So I didn't have any chemistry issues. That might be a problem in the fall if we've got a fresh batch of students and you don't know them at all to start. So you might have to add and subtract. The advantage of scheduling meetings through channels is that it'll automatically adjust that if you take members in and out. It's the team that'll always have the meeting. So that's an extreme benefit towards that. If you do it the old-fashioned way and just add people's names, you're going to have to reschedule the meetings for the new people that you add. So that's the advantage of channels.
Right.
One advantage.
Yeah.
The other advantage, by the way, I meant to say is, so for the group projects, they have a section of files on the top, and they can share a paper and workshop each other's papers together in Word straight through the files on the top of the team channel. They can have a private chat with one another, back and forth about questions regarding class and so on.
Right. So if Ramona doesn't mind waiting, I mean, actually, Nevin, this is kind of rolling. I feel like it probably makes the most sense to go through the questions that are being asked about each of you now, because otherwise it feels a little disjointed. So Kelly had a follow-up. Are you automatically enrolled in each group? Or do you have to add yourself, basically?
I believe you're automatically enrolled in each group. Yes, you are. You are. And if you try to add, if you try to add yourself, it gives you an error message that says you're already a member. Right. So you're automatically enrolled in each group. Suppose a team shell will show up, by the way, in about a week for all your classes for the fall. That's been a question lots of people have been asking Paul Fisher.
Right.
And your whole class will be populated in your general channel.
Okay.
Automatically.
Okay. Kelly Getter said, so it seems like the students could use these channels to meet on their own at any time. Is that true? Right.
Yeah, so they can schedule their own meetings. Of course, they could also just do a call now. So there's a Meet Now button right on the screen when you're in the channel, up on the right-hand corner, and they could just call each other. But they could also schedule further meetings and meet whenever they'd like. Okay.
Okay. All right. Got more. I got more. Okay. I'm just trying to keep up with them at this point. Okay. Hold on a second. Well, all right. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Let me see. Oh, okay. So Phil Mormon, can the group set up its own meetings? I guess that's similar to Kelly's, right? So the problem is I'm publishing these now, so people are now seeing each other. So
absolutely. So you go into the calendar on the left-hand side, hit schedule a meeting on the top right of the screen, I believe it is, and it's just below where it says your guests, where you schedule a regular meeting. 2 lines down, it says add channel. You just click on that, and it'll give your whole list of teams. You click on the one, and underneath it is the subset of all the channels in that team. Okay. And the same is for the students, so they could click that and make their own meetings. Okay.
Let's see. Okay, so Kim Conway said, so just to clarify, when group work is done, students would click on the general channel then to share with the entire class, or?
No, so they would, only because we didn't do group work per se, like they weren't producing answers to, they were having conversations amongst themselves. And what I would do when I dipped in was I would note what I thought were the most interesting ideas in each group. And when we went into the general conversation then, where everyone was on Teams live and I would do a lecture, I would incorporate, here's some ideas that this group had, and I would call on the students from those conversations to talk about it in front of the whole class on Teams. But absolutely, what they could do is if they were, you could have them write up a little document of their ideas and post it to the general chat for everyone to see. I mean, they could record part of their conversation and post that to the general chat video. It depends on how creative you want to get and what kind of products you want them to share. But my goal was I want them talking to each other, and then I wanted them to be comfortable sharing in front of the class.
Oh my gosh almighty. Okay. Pete Reader wanted to know what were the projects?
So the projects is something I'm going to do this forthcoming semester. Okay. And I'm giving them the option of, they could do the traditional kind of 8 to 10 page research paper, which we assign in a lot of English classes. And I suspect that at least half the class will choose that conservative option. But I'm giving them free rein to create a website, make a movie, do an ad campaign. So it's a British novel class, and the only aspect of the prompt that matters is that they do actual peer-reviewed research as part of the project, that their project just articulates the relevance of whatever novels they're writing about to the present moment in some way. So they have free range to make, like I said, whatever kind of creative project they want, whether it's a traditional research paper, a magazine article, a movie, an idea for a public project at the library or something like that. So I'm going to give them a whole sheet of stuff that I got from an MLA conference panel about experiential learning and literature, and I'll see where they go. Like I said, I suspect half of them will just write a group paper, and I still think that's really valuable because writing together is very different than writing by yourself, and I think they'll learn a lot from that. But I assume many of them will do a website as well.
Okay. So Kelly wants to know, this is Shay, did you have any issues with students getting back to the general class from their channels? Did you have to go chase them back? Chase them back in, I guess. Okay.
No, they had to chase me a couple times because the last group call that I was in, we'd get carried away, and I had to learn to keep my mouth shut in the group conversations, or else we'd go way beyond the 20 minutes. So it's best if you don't really comment. You just let them chat. They know that you're there and they'll see you and give a little wave. But no, they figured it out easy because it's in their calendar, and it just, the time would be up and they'd get the warning from Teams just like any meeting, and they'd click in. So that wasn't a problem.
Right. Let me see. So I have one more here to publish. I think I've gotten everything, but I'll skim back through again. I do want to go to Ramona for a while, and we can come back again to some of the questions, because I think they probably apply to both. I want to mention now before I forget, especially if any of you have to leave. I don't know if you noticed, so Provost Passerini's message included a plug for a whole series of TLTC events that are starting this week, actually, and they will cover teams. There will be one about teams. It's starting with the HyperFlex idea, the HyFlex idea, I should say, and then moving into collaborate teams and all different kinds of functions in there. So this is being recorded, by the way, and this will be posted in this CFD resources team, which is open access. Anybody will be able to get into it, and all the videos, all the events that have been happening since March that have been happening in teams were all recorded and are all posted in there now. So as well as these individual videos, I have about, maybe 14 or 15 faculty members doing that, and one is Jonathan. So doing these individual short videos about things that they did, some of them come out of these aha moments, some of them just come out of things that I know people are working on, that kind of thing. So so for those of you who are, wondering, the how about this, please go in and take a look at the TLTC website. If you go into news, you'll find the link in there too for this whole this array of stuff that's coming up. You're going to have to go past the first week probably, because I said starting broadly and then going into more specific things. But there's definitely that stuff that's going to be there on Teams and on 2 different levels, sort of an intro level and a more advanced level. So those of you already doing Teams, you want to go to some of this other stuff, you can do that. So all right, I'm sure that there's more out there, but let me move on to Ramona, and then go back to the Q&A because it's popping up at an incredibly rapid rate. So Ramona, I'm gonna send you live. Thank you so much, Jonathan. We'll be back with you, I'm sure. All right. Okay, so hold on one second. Ramona, I think you're muted. So.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for coming, and I hope some of what I can share will be helpful. Jonathan has talked a lot about the technical part or the technical side of Teams, so I'm not going to really go back into that. Some of how he uses Teams is very similar to what I do in my course. So what I'll talk about is the original structure of my course and how it changed when we went over to Teams. And then I want to talk about how one particular component of my course was really enhanced by me adopting the model that was used in the diversity and inclusion seminar. So I hope it makes sense. So the course that I teach is called Professional Formation 4. I teach in the Occupational Therapy program, and this is a course that our second-year students take towards the end of the program before they go out on fieldwork. This course really focuses on cultural responsiveness, how to work with clients who are ethnically, racially, and linguistically diverse. And so the course is divided into modules. The first module really focuses on self-awareness and having the students look at their bias and having a discussion about how their bias might impact their relationships with clients from diverse backgrounds. And then the second piece of it is looking at issues that relate specifically to occupational therapy as a practice and occupational therapy education, and what are some of the issues around diversity and inclusion in that component. And then the third module, they focus on a group teaching activity where they are given information about a specific issue related to race and health outcomes or occupational justice, those kinds of things, and they actually have to teach the class how to implement a group, keeping in mind all of the cultural considerations and linguistic considerations. And then the last piece is a service learning project where we actually work with adults from diverse backgrounds, older adults, and we help them figure out how to use their technology in a way that makes sense. So you might ask, well, what does that have to do with diversity and inclusion? Well, the research shows that that older adults from diverse backgrounds or ethnically diverse backgrounds tend to have the same usage level as their white counterparts, but they're not as, they don't have the same self-efficacy. So we make sure, or we try to work with our older adults to make sure that they can access health information, that they can do the things that they need to do in order to live life, you know, more independently and more meaningful. That's what we do as occupational therapists. So when I participated in the diversity and inclusion seminar, Mary and Anthony had a structure where we would lead, each participant would lead a discussion, you would take a reading and kind of facilitate the thoughtful discourse about that particular topic. And so I decided that for one of the assignments that I do in my class, it would be a great idea, instead of me giving the students the topics or identifying the issues for them, that I would have them identify issues related to occupational therapy practice and education, and then have them guide the discussions for the class. So what that involved was students would actually have to find information, literature about those specific topics. And what I found changed was that instead of me giving the students the topic, they actually had to siphon through the literature. So now they're being exposed to all of this information that says, hey, you know what? The profession is not diverse. The profession is 85% white women, and most of the clients that we're going to work with are not going to be from the same background. And so they began to understand the importance of having an appreciation for the culture, values, beliefs, traditions, and all of those things, and how that played into their ability to work with a particular population. And it made it more real for the students. So it wasn't just a matter of their professor saying, oh, guys, here's what it is. They're actually seeing what it is. And that did two things. It made the discussions more engaging. Students were more knowledgeable. So they weren't just talking about an issue that the instructor gave them. They were talking about information that they actually had time to spend with and time to read and that sort of thing. And so what changed when we went to the remote learning, well, let me back up. In my mind, when we transitioned to the remote learning piece, I'm like, oh boy, how do we do this so that the students still have an opportunity to have that dialogue and to have that discourse? So I did, similar to what Jonathan did, I created the channels and I assigned the students to channels. So what I did was I used a team-based learning approach, and the occupational therapy program is very big on team-based learning. So our students are actually assigned to teams in their the first year of the program. And so that works its way all the way through the program. So I didn't have to worry so much about that. And so they were assigned to channels based on their teams. And I would also go into the teams. I could hear what they were talking about. I could help facilitate some of the conversation, but I could also pull back to hear what they were talking about. And the nice thing was, because I had already transitioned to the students leading the discussion, when we went into teams, they were already comfortable with that. So it was still a very robust discussion. It was still very engaging. So I don't feel like we lost any of the richness because we weren't face to face. And it was very helpful. And one of the things that was also helpful in adopting the model that was used in the diversity and inclusion piece was that students were then able to take the information, because they did have a level of competence with the information, to then go into other teams and share the information. So it was kind of like they mastered a particular topic, and then they were able to go into other teams and share that information. So everybody was exposed to information in a way, honestly, that wasn't happening in the face-to-face piece of it. So I think that there are ways to still continue to engage students in very meaningful ways, even if you are doing the remote or the online learning piece. So that's basically what I wanted to share with you, how I was able to still hold on to, you know, the dynamic part of the course, even though we were using Teams and all of that.
Sound back. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ramona. That's really terrific. And of course, a plug for the diversity seminar is always a good thing. I have high hopes it'll actually happen again this coming year. We'll see. So in the meantime, let's see. There are other questions floating in here. Okay, so yeah, all right, so the way the live events work is you're only going to see the speaker because I'm basically pushing people out into this live event. So, and the reason to do a live event, because somebody else asked me that, is because I don't have to worry about people logging in or adding them to a team or adding them to a group. And if those of you who attended the last ANS meeting of the year knows that if you send people into a general stream, they often will go in and create their own meeting inadvertently. And so we had something like 4 meetings going simultaneously. So live, while it means that the attendees have a little bit less sort of access in some ways, right? It's all written questions and so on, but the ability to let people go in and out is just, so if you're going to do an event, so the talent show ran this way, a month and a half ago, and I've been doing all the events this way. So I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to know about doing a live event, because it took me a little while to get down to it, to get the knack of it, but it can work quite well. Anyway, so this is sort of background information, but I do have, let's see, I have a bunch of other questions coming up. Okay, so I'm going to put out the ones that are also either for Jonathan and Ramona, but also for Ramona. Let's start with Ramona. Amy Jo wants to know, how did you adapt the service learning part of the course to remote learning?
Yeah, that was the tricky part. And actually, so let me just tell you a little bit more about the service learning. So the older adults would actually come to campus and they would bring their own device. If it was their telephone or their laptop, the students would kind of help them navigate through. Like, for example, we had one of our participants who wanted to be able to access the Bible on her phone. And so the students were actually able to show her how to do that, walk her through steps, show her how to enlarge text and all of those things. And because we could not have that face-to-face piece, the teams actually developed proposals for a program. So I actually gave them a grant template. And I'm hoping that once all of this clears, we're actually able to submit their proposals to see if we can, in fact, develop a program that's based on helping, older adults from diverse backgrounds access their technology in a meaningful way. So we did have to shift it. They developed grant proposals.
Thanks, Ramona. So the next question is for either of you, but I think if you each answer it, because you probably had different ways to deal with it. It was from Kelly Gettert. Any tips for making sure all the students are participating in the discussion groups? She's thinking of the student who might be sitting there mostly silent. So Ramona, maybe you want to do it, and then I'll bring up Jonathan.
Okay. So the way I ran the class, it was also a flipped model, if you will. So there were specific activities that needed to be completed at the end of each session. So we have what's called application activities, and those application activities have deliverables. So they have to work in their teams in order to complete the deliverables, and they have to put their names on it. So their peers, I'm hoping, will not put their name on a work where they didn't participate. So each session had an application activity that students had to complete and submit.
Okay, terrific. All right, so Jonathan, I'm going to do, let's see, I'm going to put you up next. So let's see, there you are. You're back up.
Hello. So yeah, for the 2 different contexts, in the group work one that I'm doing in the fall, as part of experiential learning, one of the best things to do is have the students grade one another. And so one of the ways to maintain this discipline will be that part of the student's grade for the group project is assigned by the students, with the caveat that I could also, if there's anything extreme, I can override it. But they'll have each other disciplining each other in a way. In the group work I did in the spring, I got lucky because it was the chemistry of the class made them just kind of expect that when they're in the group, they go around in a robin. That's how they just automatically thought they would do it. So almost every single group, someone would start and then just turn to the next person and they went around, and then it would organically turn into a conversation that way. So I didn't actually have that problem. If I did, and I expect I will have it at some point, you know, I would just reach out in the chat and say, I expect to hear from you, so and so, you know, send a private message to that person. And if that doesn't work, maybe go to a trusted student in the group and say, hey, I want you to call on Ramona because she's not speaking up, or I want you to, you know, Mary's not speaking up because she's very shy, so if you call on Mary. So, you know, that's a very high possibility that this might happen, and you're gonna need techniques for it. But again, the dynamics of a small group change so much how the students behave. When they're in front of a big group of each other, they're paralyzed, some of them, especially in core 3, because you get mixed disciplines. All of a sudden the students freeze. You put them in a group of 5 people and they really open up in amazing ways. I got to tell you, I hate group work. When I was a student, I hated group work. But most students now just open up in different ways when they're doing it. That I think it's really important.
Okay.
While you have me on, Mary, I'm gonna ask.
Sure.
I think Sona had a question about.
Yeah.
Did anyone ever finish their group discussions early? And yes, they did. And there's 2 strands of thinking I had. Occasionally, I would catch them because I'd dip in and they'd be kind of done. And especially, you know, there were clearly groups that were better than other groups, or more intellectual than other groups, let's say. If I caught them, I could ask 2 things. Sometimes I'd ask them to reprise what they talked about. You know, if I caught them really late, I'd say, just tell me again what you said. And it's a way of reinforcing what they had thought. And you'd be surprised how hard it was sometimes for them to remember what they had just said 2 minutes earlier. So I thought that was useful in kind of reviewing what they had been discussing and polishing it up. I could also ask follow-up questions. I had a whole class prepared, so I had plenty of other things to ask, and I would just throw it out there and say, talk about this before class begins. On the other hand, what I also thought was, look, if they went silent for the last group and just started talking about things that were off topic, I thought, given the circumstances, that was healthy too. That what students were missing out as we went remote was all that in between class time of running into other humans their age and talking about what they were worried about and what they cared about and what they were interested in. So if they weren't talking about, you know, faith and doubt in 19th century British literature for all 20 minutes, that was totally fine with me, because that extra 5 or 10 minutes was probably useful to them as humans, and to restoring that sense of university community that had been taken away from them.
Yeah. And then if I could just add to, one of the things that I would do is ask groups or the teams to check in with me before they, you know, came out of their discussion. So that way, you know, if they were finished early, that would give me an opportunity to, you know, just make sure that they had discussed the topic thoroughly, or if I could help them maybe think through some of the topics that we were talking about, because some of the topics were pretty, you know, difficult or uncomfortable at times. And so I wanted to make sure that the conversation had not stopped because people didn't know what language to use to express themselves, or one person in the group maybe felt uncomfortable expressing an idea that they thought may not be popular. So I would always ask them to just check in with me first, and then let's see where we go from there.
Mary, you went mute on us.
I hear you.
Sorry. I was going to say, I'm going to start with Ramona, stay with Ramona for the moment, and then pull you back on Jonathan. At least 2 people have asked about the video mode issue. And it's a constant point of conversation, right? Did you require students to be in video mode? And then one of them was also just within the groups, the whole video mode thing. So Ramona, how did you handle that this spring? And what might you do?
I did not require them to be on video mode. You know, at this point in the game, again, because this was their last semester before they were heading out on fieldwork, and students were already very stressed. I think they wanted to be in the class. They wanted to be able to have a discussion and have that interaction. And the other piece of it is that I would start my class just by doing a check-in. How's everybody doing? Giving people who felt comfortable an opportunity to share. So, I didn't require the video.
Jonathan? Okay, so you're up next.
So I did not require it. I pretty much expected it and said aloud that I would highly preferred it. And I had no trouble in the Core 3 class. Now, as you know, Core 3 is 99% seniors, except for the the other person who's got to accommodate their schedule. And I found the older students were much more comfortable using it. I had a freshman class that I mentioned earlier. They were a real pain in the neck. There were about 5 out of 15 or 5 out of 18 who would regularly be on the video, and the others would selectively turn it on only when they were speaking. So, of course, there are all sorts of domestic issues that led to that. I think in the fall, I'm going to require it and just coach them into how to use it. So, now there's plenty of background features. Teams has made it very easy to add your own special background, like Ramona's intergalactic thing, or Nebula. So it is much less concern for privacy, I think, with the video. And for goodness sakes, you got to show up to class. As far as I'm concerned, in the normal world, you can at least make your face presentable enough to be in front of a screen. I think it makes the engagement a lot different. And just for public notice, because a lot of you might not have heard, but Teams is going to be at some point in the fall, 7x7, 49 students visible on screen at once. So most of our classes, I imagine we're not going to have many classes with more than 50 people in them. So most of your students will be visible at all times.
Right. So there was also a question for both of you. I guess I'll just ask both of you to deal with it about grading. How do you handle grading in these new formats?
So because I'm on, I'll just answer first.
Yeah.
This became how I graded class participation and it's another way to say, Wallflower Mary, who's not participating, I could say, hey, look, your class participation grade's going to go down if you don't contribute more in the groups. And of course, if I couldn't watch all 5 conversations at once, so maybe I was missing that person's contribution, I could say, okay, correct me. I'll watch you first next week and see you talk. Yeah, I mean, it's part of their class participation grade, and there's always something subjective about that, but their job, as I make clear on my syllabi, is to make sure I know that they're participating and that it's not a mystery to me.
That's good.
And
yeah,
with team-based learning, there is a peer feedback component to it. And twice during the semester, students complete a peer feedback form on each of their team members. The nice thing about that is that at the start of the semester, the students actually determine what those parameters are going to be. How are you going to evaluate each other? So they actually develop the peer feedback form. Participation and components of that are always a part of the rubric, and so that's one of the ways that I gauge participation, and that didn't change with the transition. So that's one piece of it.
Okay, thank you, Ramona. Let's see. So Angela has a question about, well, I'm not sure if this is for either one or the other. So how do you anticipate doing these groups, I guess, for either in the high flex model? So Ramona, we'll start with you. Will students who are in the classroom going to be working with the students who are coming in remotely? How will you deal with the volume of those students in the room, sort of talking on Teams all at once?
So the answer is right now, I don't know. So there's so many things that are changing. So the course that I'm teaching in the fall, I actually co-taught last year. Now I have the entire course, which is 60 students. So, and I'm going to be doing that remotely. So there are still a lot of things up in the air. I'm still trying to structure the course, because in the past, because it's an It's one of our intro courses. There's a lot of information and a lot of detail. You cannot do that remotely. I'm going to have to look at how I structure the course. So right now, unfortunately, the answer is I'm not sure yet. We will continue the same team-based learning model so that students will have that opportunity to collaborate, but what that's going to look like, if we'll have 30 in a room and 30 online, I just don't know yet. Sorry. We can't hear you, Mary.
So
Sorry, thanks.
I actually think the key benefit to HiFlex, perhaps the only benefit to HiFlex, there's only two benefits. One is that students learn how to be more adept at using these technologies, which the companies they work for will be using when they graduate. The key benefit to us of HiFlex is that at any given moment, if the state changes its guidance, the CDC changes its guidance, if we have an outburst on campus, God forbid, or in Essex County, we can immediately and seamlessly turn to fully remote learning. Otherwise, the classroom is not going to be better, certainly, than fully face-to-face would be, or than fully remote would be. Because fully remote, at least you have the control of everyone being in the same environment, and you're sitting there staring in front of your controlled screen in a more, it's easier to just look at the screen than to look at the class and the screen at the same time. So absolutely, to get back to the question, absolutely, I'm going to use groups, and I'm going to have group work that is doesn't really take into consideration whether the students are in the classroom or at home, because I think the experience is going to be better if the students have the laptop in front of them and are in the team's conversation. So I'm hoping that this will actually get the students at home more engaged with what's going on in the classroom by having them sit there in their groups that are both in the class and at home at the same time. So ideally that will work and help kind of bring the two spaces together more seamlessly.
So Emery Murphy is, I'm not sure, I mean, I can see, well, I'll let you handle it, Jonathan, and then go to Ramona to see. I'm not sure how many heated debates there were in your groups and the topics that we're doing, but I don't know. So were any tips for managing heated debates in these virtual discussions? Emery's saying in her foreign policy classes, diverse viewpoints regarding how to define and pursue these these issues. So how do you manage to keep things civil and professional?
Well, one of the wonderful things about the English classroom is that it's fairly self-selecting, which is frustrating because sometimes there's not enough debate. And the core 3 classes help out a little bit there because there's usually some strongly, how shall I put this, that those classes attract a more religious set of student than our typical classes get. So the English people in this meeting will know who I'm talking about, but there's probably 3 very devout religious students at any given time in the major where every question circles back to the Bible or something Catholic. And I had one of our star students who does that in this particular class. And there were a couple moments where his thinking clearly didn't line up with the rest of his group, but they were polite. And again, this is partially their maturity. They're seniors and juniors. They knew how to navigate it and handled it well. And I think it's the same as a classroom. So if this same kind of debate happens in the classroom as happens in the team group, if you're there, you handle it the same way. The problem becomes is if you can't monitor all these groups at the same time. So you really need to have good contact during the full classroom time where you remind people that, look, students, if you're having any kind of dynamic issues in your group, you need to let me know so that I can help you solve it by having a chat with that group or with that individual and so on. But you need, students are not empowered unless you give them the power. So you need to keep reminding them in the big classroom sessions that, look, if you have an issue, it's a possibility that you will. I know it's a possibility. I'm here to help you. Come talk to me privately in one way or another, and I will help you out. So I think that's the key, is that you just keep making yourself available, make it easy for them to let you know that something's bothering them.
Okay, thank you. Ramona?
Yeah, so I agree with what Jonathan said, that you make yourself available. You have to create a space where students feel comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. But I think, like most of us do when we're talking about groups and teams, we have them establish their norms, right? We have them, lay out how they're going to have discussions, how they're going to communicate with each other, what's appropriate, what's acceptable, what's not. And then when they're going off into their teams to have the discussions that maybe I can't be in at the moment, they have to remember to take those norms with them. And I strongly encourage them to do that, so that when they do get to a point where there may be a difference of opinion, somebody feels strongly, that they are, to the best of their ability, keeping the conversation within that construct. So that's the only other thing that I would add. And again, going back to the peer feedback, that is also something that the students are evaluating each other on. Respect for other people's ideas, how someone communicates their ideas, those sorts of things. So they're holding each other accountable.
Right. So two things. So Kelly Getter is saying it seems like more of an observation, but it's an important one. Doing teams-based discussion who are in the classroom and at home sounds like we're going to need to require the students coming to class to have headphones for their computers, which does seem to make a certain amount of sense, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this conversation with others. I'm not quite sure what my own room is going to look like, but in the fall. But I envision the only real way to have everybody involved would be to have everyone in teams, even if half of them are sitting in front of me and the other half are sitting at home or in the
Right.
dorm room, because otherwise, one of the big problems of Falx, and you'll see it over and over again, is how do you keep the virtual students engaged in what's going on? Because you're sitting there with a group of people in front of you. The inclination is, of course, to have that conversation with them. How do you see the hand raises in the Teams thing that's showing up on the video screen behind you? Or maybe you're in Teams, so you can see it in front of you. But so I think these are logistics that we're going to have to work out. And then I don't want to ignore Yvonne Una's question, which was the differences between doing group work in Blackboard, say, I guess in the discussion board, there's also collaborate and doing it in Teams. I don't know if either of you can address that, because I don't know, but did you do it originally in Blackboard, Ramona?
So when we were using Blackboard, we were face to face.
Okay.
And I'll tell you honestly, I am not as smart, for lack of a better word, with Blackboard Collaborate. I'm not as familiar. I'm a lot more comfortable with Teams, but come the fall, I will, or I plan to use Blackboard Collaborate more. So I'll be learning that over the summer. So I can't really give a comparison of the two, because I just don't know enough about Blackboard Collaborate yet.
Yeah. Yeah, no, me either. Jonathan, what about you? Were you using Blackboard?
I was not. So one thing just to remind everybody, or to tell them, is that even if you use Teams as your primary medium for teaching in the fall, the one key feature that is missing from Teams as far as the university is concerned is they cannot archive your course on it, which they need to do for legal purposes, is to have an archive of everything available. So no matter what, you need to have just about everything you do on Blackboard, meaning your syllabus, your quizzes, all your grading has to go through there anyway. So there is some efficiency to using Collaborate. I just happen to like Teams better. I think it's much more intuitive and easy and attractive. But Blackboard Collaborate Ultra does have a breakout session function. And if you could easily sign up. There's plenty of room to take the courses on Blackboard Ultra that TLT is running. There's at least 2 every week. And they'll explain how to do it. But you could actually, it's almost like the classroom. If you learn how to do it well enough, mid-class, you could say, I want to break you up into groups, and you literally just click names into boxes and create the groups, and they break out, and you set a time limit on it. And at the end of the time limit, they all come back into the group automatically, into the main group. So it is possible. In many ways, it is probably better, but I refuse to accept that it is because there's only so many things I could learn in 1 year. So I'm sticking with Teams.
Yeah, and the one thing, if I can just add, the one thing too that I've learned about Blackboard Collaborate that makes me lean towards Team. I'll probably be using both, but with Blackboard Collaborate, you actually have to recreate your groups for each session. Which, it takes a little bit of time, whereas with Teams, once it's set, I can just, reschedule, like Jonathan had mentioned earlier, just kind of reset a recurring meeting, and the channels are already there. The groups can just go into their channels. So that's the one drawback for me, especially with using a team-based learning approach where we work a lot in our teams.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, we only have a minute or two left. So I think, hold on, I think there's one more question here. Genevieve, okay. I think you guys can see it. Do you have a statement or a template that you share with the students as guidelines for team participation and team best practices that's consistent across your classes? Yeah.
Yes.
You're still up, Ramona. Yeah.
Oh, yes. We do. We have several of our courses that use team-based learning, and I know that in the course that I'll be teaching in the fall, we give them information about team-based learning. We actually have them go through the process just to get them familiar with how the experience works, what it's going to look like. So yeah, we try to thread it throughout those courses in our curriculum so that the students are aware, and we're using it consistently across courses.
Okay, Jonathan, do you want to talk? Okay.
Yeah, so on I didn't have it in the spring. I had to add it, of course, when we went remote, but I put a simple 3 sentences in the course expectations or rules section on my syllabus. And it said, I expect video on unless you arrange something otherwise for good reason with me. So you're welcome to use the background function to put up something behind, to give you privacy. I said, please use your hands, the hand raising function. I mentioned when it's appropriate to use the chat bar. It's very distracting if they're having a whole conversation in the side. But if someone said, can you repeat that date? Can you repeat that title? Factual kind of questions, I would answer those in the side. I also found that students were wanting to send me Teams chat messages as their primary way to communicate with me. They just assumed that that's what I'd be doing. And at first it drove me batty because I wasn't used to checking it. Now that I live with my face staring at the screen all summer, it's totally fine. So I have to decide about that, but it's something to keep in mind. If you're going to use Teams, students are immediately going to think that chat is a suitable way to talk to you instead of email. So I think on your syllabus, you want to make clear what your preference is for that. So yeah, those issues to mute, I think they'll all figure that out by now, but doesn't hurt to mention to put on mute when you're not talking. And what to do, on your syllabus should be what to do if you've got technological difficulties and you can't get into the class for the day or for the time. Well, what do you do?
Well, thank all of you for coming. I hope we got to everybody's questions. If not, I'm sure Ramona and Jonathan would be delighted to get an email from you asking your question, and as would I. So thank you all for coming out on this 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. And yes, please keep your eyes open for all different kinds of things still coming this summer from both TLTC and the CFD. So have a wonderful day, and see you all soon. Be safe out there. Bye-bye.